Anthem was released worldwide by Bioware on February 22nd, 2019, and now almost 4 years later I checked out and fully completed the story before the service shut down inevitably to see and answer the question, is Anthem worth playing in 2023? So let's find out.
Lockhart QT.
Now then, this video isn't going to be a documentary, but here's a quick summary of Anthem's development. Anthem was first shown off at Xbox's E3 conference all the way back in 2017, and whilst the demo looked really impressive, sadly it was all smoke and mirrors. Amongst also massive crunch, mistreatment of staff, mismarketing, old staff leaving Bioware for good, and much more, Anthem launched with a massive lack of content, ideas, and longevity, which is needed for a live service MMO. And after presenting a long roadmap going into 2019 after launch, this was later scrapped to focus on smaller updates until February 2021, where Bioware and EA announced that they were stopping all active development on Anthem and the Anthem 2.0 update, also known as Anthem Next, which was meant to completely overhaul and fix the game after its shoddy launch, sort of like Destiny and how the Taken King expansion sort of fixed and invigorated the Destiny series and franchise. So, knowing all of that, let's get into my time with Anthem in 2023. I was playing Anthem on PS5, but it was obviously the PS4 version. Anthem was really interesting to play at the very least. I expected a completely dead game, and to my surprise, there were still people playing this game, and as of writing this video in January 2023, Anthem currently has 34,000 estimated daily players. So I created my Javelin and began the story mode. Anthem's core gameplay is really fun actually, and I was really surprised by this because I did play a bit of the beta, but I couldn't really remember what my feeling was around that time. And like I said, the actual flying and the combat was brilliant. And for those who don't know, Anthem is very similar to games like Warframe or Destiny, taking very few ideas from Destiny. Flying around the open world feels so good, even if all I was doing all the time was overheating. And the open world itself, even on a PS4 running on a PS5, was really gorgeous. Like, the game looks brilliant, with brilliant particle effects, beautiful weather and lighting. For those who don't know, Anthem runs on EA's Frostbite engine, and this engine caused them lots of issues that meant that, they were going to have lots of issues anyway. But Frostbite was not meant for an open world third person shooter, but instead was designed for FPS games like Battlefield, as the Frostbite engine was developed for Battlefield by DICE. This is why both Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem both had a difficult development, as Bioware didn't know how to create games properly for Frostbite and really struggled, and that shows whilst playing Anthem. Going into the story next. The first couple of missions were actually really fun and presented me with the world in an interesting way, but had me revisiting a few of the same areas. But after this is where I started to run into lots of problems. After the first couple of missions, the story began to take a massive nosedive. I began to lose interest as I was presented with very repetitive missions, par 2, and also, like I said earlier, you had to revisit loads of the same areas, sort of like Destiny 1 vanilla. The missions ranged from going here and killing enemies, collecting batteries, collecting ruins, or collecting floating glowing orbs to deposit somewhere else. Except for one mission which had a really interesting puzzle with sort of glowing panels that flickered and rotated round. That was actually quite fun. But after a while I lost track of the main story as well as the side missions, with no idea what was really going on in some cases. The only mission that I actually quite liked was the story mission where you have to get I think it's General Tarsus's armor, who's one of the fabled legionaries or something like that. Again, I didn't really fully understand the story, and essentially you have to do trials as part of the mission, as part of the campaign mission, and you have to reenact a sort of massive battle that took place in the game's lore, and this was actually really fun. I was really enjoying myself at this point. However, I missed out on the last part of the mission, which was the sort of climax of the battle, because my game hard crashed on PS4, on PS5 even, and then reloaded me back at the end of the mission, which then skipped the mission entirely and just took me right to the end of the mission and then carried on with the campaign. So I essentially missed out on a mission that I was really looking forward to and actually really enjoying. Other bugs I encountered were the fact that the final boss just kept disappearing completely out of the blue and for no reason, as well as essentially I was flying down, and as soon as I hit the water I went completely out of bounds, and it was just really weird. And it was really funny because here I was completely stuck until I was reloaded back in with my party, and I was sort of watching them from afar, and it was quite funny. The only other main big issue I had was matchmaking. Since the game's population is much lower than the launch, I knew this was going to be an issue, but after about 3/4 of the way through the game, I actually stopped matchmaking with players altogether, for the main story at least. And I was put into solo lobbies because the game physically couldn't put me in with more than one person, which I found really funny. But to be fair, I actually enjoyed playing by myself, especially for the story missions, as it made them a bit harder and more enjoyable in some cases, which begs the question of why was Anthem a live service multiplayer game, as I do think it could have worked well as a single player open world game. Speaking of which, I have to talk about 2 missions in particular, because 2 of these missions were just some of the worst missions I've ever played in a game. They were that bad. First off, the Legionnaire's tombs. If you have followed like the controversy and development and all the problems with Anthem, you'll have heard of this mission. This was the mission everyone complained about. This mission occurs halfway through the story and completely stops at a halt, and basically tasks you with exploring 4 sets of challenges in 4 tombs across the open world. Some of these challenges range from getting combo kills with different elements, or just kills in general. However, the 3 that I really struggled with were completing 3 world events, getting revives, and 50 melee defeats. Now, the 50 melee kills wasn't difficult, it was just really grindy and repetitive and just got boring after a while, but my problems really lay with the world events and revive mechanics. Reviving other players was next to impossible because I rarely encountered other players in the game, so I couldn't revive them, and I had to essentially go around reviving NPCs for this mission to actually fully complete. And the world events never seemed to pop in for me, so I had to wait. These are essentially, if you've played Destiny, these are essentially public events. But the only problem was in Destiny there's at least a timer and a way to track them, whereas in Anthem they just sort of randomly occurred like in Destiny 1 Vanilla. But the problem with this was I wasn't getting any at all, so I was sometimes going hours without getting a world event, meaning that I was essentially stuck for hours on end not being able to complete the main story for no reason at all. The game also has lots of filler missions later on in the story after this main sort of Legionnaire's Tombs mission that need to be completed to progress the story later on, and that's all these missions are. Pointless filler to pad out the game's runtime, because other than that, the game's story can literally be completed in a single sitting. Anyway, I pressed on and then fully completed the main story campaign, and my oh my, what a letdown this was. For starters, spoilers by the way, the main bad guy who's in charge of the Dominion, I can't even remember his name or what he's doing. Essentially he's trying to get the Anthem of Creation, which is essentially this game's MacGuffin, which does something, I guess. The main bad guy just sort of dies, and using an overpowered weapon, I completely and utterly humiliated the final boss in a few hits, really, if he wasn't glitching out all over the place, that was. And speaking of which, I find it funny how Anthem was lacking in certain other gameplay areas, but Anthem's store and microtransactions still work just fine, and you can still buy crystals with real world money. As with crystals I earned in-game, I didn't spend any money IRL, thank God. I bought a legendary weapon which made the final parts of the game a complete and utter breeze. Like I said, I don't know the name of the weapon on hand, but it essentially shot a big sort of saw blade that exploded, and this completely decimated any boss that it came in its way, which is good because it makes me have that power fantasy, but at the same time it was completely and utterly broken. So, in summary, I don't think Anthem is worth it at all in 2023, due to the dwindling player base, lack of content, lack of gameplay really at all, and the looming possibility of the servers inevitably shutting down for good. Hence why I played Anthem now, because I've recently been getting into Mass Effect, and essentially at some point I will get into Dragon Age, as I'm a big fan of Bioware. And Anthem for me was just a massive letdown, and I wanted to at least experience it and play it on the channel before the servers shut down for good. However, there was some good here in Anthem, and it makes me kind of sad that the game happened in the way it did, because I think that we could have gotten a much better game, because the flying mechanics and the general gunplay and combat was really fun and felt really good to play, especially the actual flying. It just felt so tight and so responsive. I also liked exploring Fort Tarsis to find extra lore tidbits, as well as chatting with some NPCs, but here is another area where the game fell flat. Bioware is known for their incredible storytelling with games such as Dragon Age and Mass Effect 2, especially with Mass Effect 2. Like Mass Effect 2 I think is Bioware's magnum opus. I think Mass Effect 2 is one of the best games ever made, and going from that to the NPC dialogue in this game, it's just really bad. There's some really cringy dialogue in this game, especially with the main character and some other NPCs that I just don't want to go over because it's not worth my time. However, I do wish Fort Tarsis was actually a main area you could hang out between missions with friends. I wish it was more like a community hub, sort of like the tower in Destiny. So yeah, like I said, I really don't think Anthem is worth it in 2023. Fun fact, I actually got this game for 99p, which was really funny. And the funny thing is, I actually got a brand new sealed copy with the Legion of the Dawn pre-order bonuses, and I got it for 99p plus shipping. And the funny thing is, the company, I personally, I don't think it was an accident, but they sent me 2 copies, so I just gave one to my sister at the time, and I think that's really funny. But yeah, if you do want to play Anthem, you do want to experience it before the servers shut down for good, I'd say get it. At the same time, although I don't think it's worth it, I don't think it's worth your time, especially if you're going out your way to complete the story and do the end game. But it is 99p in some places, plus it's on Game Pass, plus it's on EA Play as well, so plus it's in other places as well. So, you know, Anthem is really accessible at the moment, but at the same time, one day it will be shut down, so if you want to play it now, essentially. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and if you want more Bioware content, Mass Effect content, well, I was going to say Anthem content, but this is probably the last video I ever do on it, and gaming content in general, stay subscribed to the channel, and thank you so much for the recent love on the videos. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.